Hello, everybody. I'm curious how many of you remember the saying, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me." Yeah, that's a myth. We are exposed to harmful messages every day, on a regular basis. Microaggressions at work, rude people on our commute, or at the grocery store, but most importantly, in our close relationships. I've studied how we use messages in our relationships for over 20 years. And one of the biggest challenges I've found is that we just don't take them seriously. And that's a really big mistake. Our messages can be arrayed on a simple continuum from healthy to hurtful. What's really important about them is because our messages are the essence of our relationships, the spirit and soul of what we communicate. Healthy relationships and healthy communication, it prompts us to feel closeness, satisfaction, and trust. These messages sound like affirmations, positive support. It helps us to talk constructively about the tough stuff, the conflict, and problem solve. This kind of communication gives us a lightness of being. Now, the hurtful messages, they make us feel depressed, anxious, insecure. They sound like insults and ridicule, put-downs, threats. These kinds of messages actually prompt us to feel psychological pain. They dim and darken our well-being. In the midst of everyday life, it's really easy to overlook the health concerns that are actually in our own homes. 20 years ago, the World Health Organization published a report. It brought global attention to the epidemic rates of what we call intimate partner violence. This violence involves physical and sexual abuse, stalking behaviors, and the most common one, psychological aggression. This report was especially significant because it confirmed across all countries, all socioeconomic, all cultures, that domestic violence occurs everywhere. The primary victims of this violence are women and children, to the extent that they estimated 1 in 4 women around the world experiences it. This is still an insidious and overlooked concern within the United States, with 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men reporting experience with it. Now, this is of specific interest to me as a communication scholar, because I study psychological aggression. We often refer to it as the dark side of interpersonal communication. Now, it's commonly overlooked, often because it doesn't leave the same kinds of physical evidence and bruising, because it's conveyed with verbal and nonverbal messages that basically are intended to attack us mentally and emotionally, or to control us. Within the United States, this form of aggression is so common that 1 out of every 3 adults experiences it. Now, it's not only common, it's costly. It's costly to the individual, to our families. We carry this negative emotion and negative experience into our workplaces, and it bleeds through our communities. Now, this is an enormous threat to our society because we know that psychological aggression is one of the most common precursors to all of the other forms of intimate partner violence. Now, I know some of you may be sitting there thinking, this doesn't really affect me. But statistically speaking, you're sitting next to somebody to whom it does. I'd like you to take a look at the messages on the board. These are just a few examples, but I'd like you to think about, do you recognize any? How many of them do you use? When? Where? With whom? And why? Our attitudes and beliefs are keys to understanding harmful communication patterns. As we are socialized, we learn to use messages to get what we want. We take this learning that has occurred from our role models, and we take those lessons and we combine them with our own lived experiences. Now, in our close relationships, we have a tendency to take our relational partners for granted. And we assume that we have certain rights and privileges that we've earned in how we talk to them. We talk to our closest relational partners the most often, so they are the ones that we show our aggression and when we let down and when we're upset. We take our frustration out on them. In family settings, this is especially important because if you think about being exposed to psychological aggression over time, it's just like living with a bully. We can't escape. We have no control and no power to stop it. So this is extremely debilitating. Let me give you an example. I'd like to tell you a story. I couldn't figure out who the actual author of this story was, but I want to say that I thank them for their creativity and insight. There once was a child who had a very serious temper. The parents came to the child and gave them a bag of nails and said, "Every day that you lose your temper and you speak in harmful ways, you have to hammer a nail into the back of the fence." This was really hard work for the child. So over time, they hammered all the nails in. The parents at that point said, "Okay, for every time you are able to maintain your anger and to work with it constructively, you get to remove a nail from the fence." The child practiced, and one day came when all of the nails were gone. So the parents walked to the fence with the child, and they said, "Wow, you've done an amazing job, but look at the fence. It's never going to be the same. When you say things in hurt and anger, you leave wounds and scars. No matter if you say, 'I'm sorry,' you're not going to take the scar away." Hurtful messages in our relationships act the very same way as the nails in the fence. They may seem small and insignificant. You may not even think about them. But when used in a patterned way over time, they begin to diminish and degrade the integrity of our relationships. Even if you want to try and apologize and repair, we remember the hurt. So similar to the fence, our relationships may still stand intact, but over time, they become riddled with cracks and wounds and scars to the point that they can become unsatisfactory and dysfunctional. On a day-to-day basis, I want you to think about the kinds of messages you use, and that when you use these kinds of hurtful comments that kind of come off one-off here and there, it's actually like inflicting a wound of resentment and harm in your partner. Now, I think that researching these messages is so very important within our close relationships because it's there that we have the most at stake. So why am I telling you this today? I appreciate you being here and listening, but I want you to take a moment and think about, most of us never consider how we were socialized to communicate. We don't think about our implicit biases and beliefs, and we don't think about how we hurt people with our messages. This kind of complacency really alarms me. In a world where there is so much hurt that we can't control, we overlook the simplest ways where we can take action. So I have 3 main takeaways for you today. The first one is I need you to think about how the impact of your message goes well beyond your intentions. So even when you didn't think you designed it to be hurtful, it can be. Now let's be honest, none of us are perfect. We all are susceptible to stress And our brains have developed to pursue our own self-interest and survive. So I'm curious, if you asked, how often do I hurt you with what I say? Realize you would get the most accurate response from the partners that are around you the most. Second, I know that talking about harmful communication might be really uncomfortable because nobody wants to think that they're part of the problem. But we all know what it feels like when we love somebody who hurts us. So I say to you, if you happen to be hurting, I strongly encourage you, protect yourself. If that person won't admit and acknowledge how they're hurting you, seek people in your world who will help you and support you. For those of you who may be hurting others, take responsibility for your words. I need you to talk to these people, and I need you to think about, how can I change? Be open to the response they give you. Make sure that you can set a plan, and you need to make sure that you understand that this is not about perfection. We are imperfect people, so what it is about is practice and progress on a daily basis. The third point is the one that's actually the brightest. I know that talking about these uncomfortable kinds of interactions might be difficult, but there's so much power in being able to use this kind of conversation to repair your relationships. So we know that healthy communication feels good. It actually invigorates us. It adds vitality to our relationships. So I want you to think about how this can be something that you purposefully engage in with your partners. I know that it's probably not going to be easy, but I encourage you, it's worth your time and effort to do it. My big takeaway today, my big idea for you, is that I want you to think about how you learned to communicate. I want you to realize that you have the ability to make choices and change. When we identify what we're doing, we have the ability to disrupt harmful patterns and make things better, not only for us, but for our partners. So let's all learn from the child in the story today. Anyone can be a jerk. It's really important to be kind and empathetic, and that takes a very strong sense of character. So I challenge you to communicate more constructively in positive ways that's actually going to reinforce you and your partner's heart and health. I leave you today with my version of the saying. Sticks and stones will break my bones, and words may hurt my heart, but grace and practice set the tone for words to impart change and hope in a challenging world where light will overcome the dark. Thank you.